My name is Chad McBain. I've been licensed for 23 years with Realty Executives, Remax, and at a company that I've forgotten about in my first year. But anyway, yeah, so 23 years.
I'm Jide Atilola, and I've been in real estate. This will be my 10th year.
I'm John Leacock. I've been in real estate since January the 1st, 2006. I guess if you do the math, it's probably in 17, 18 years this year.
Years, baby.
Yeah.
My personal experiences in real estate. Well, what I would say is, when I started, I was, I believe, the only black male on the real estate board in June of 2000. Doreen, of course, who we mentioned off camera, was on the board as well. And I don't know that I thought too much about it, but back then we went, John will remember this, all the real estate companies and all the listings were in the newspaper. So as you flip through the newspaper, all the names and faces of everybody would be in there. So it was pretty obvious as you flip through that there was not a lot of diversity on the real estate board back then. So, and as through the years, I mean, we've got lots of different cultures that have joined this board. When I started, there was just under 400 people here. So now we're almost twice that size. So now it's a pretty eclectic group. And just looking at my office alone, probably 50% of the people in there would not identify as Caucasian. So that's a lot different than from when I started, for sure. And obviously, lots of different flavors, I guess, that have joined over the years. But I don't know, I think it's a cool thing. I started, my broker my first year was actually a Chinese gentleman who had been trained by another Chinese gentleman who worked at a company called Royal City Realty back in the day. So maybe I was the only male person of color at the time, but there were certainly ethnic minorities on the board long before I got here. So, and my understanding, and I'm probably going to mess this gentleman's name up, I believe it was Chen Liu. And my understanding was he was a top producer throughout the 80s and 90s. So, and he was Chinese. So, yeah, I think maybe Guelph's always been a little bit diverse, but that's my experiences over the years, just in terms of visually seeing the differences of what's going on. Yeah. So, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, my experience is, I guess, a bit unique. When I first started, I was advised to look at teams. So I was looking at different teams and how I could fit in there. And I don't think I ever told you this, but when I saw Chad as a team leader, that was part of the reason I joined your team. So that's where I started. Yeah, for competition now, no. But yeah, that was part of why I joined the team, and I felt comfortable. Growing up here in Guelph, I've always been the minority, so I didn't really know any different. But when it came to, seeing a lot of other agents and what it looked like, it didn't really look like me. So that was kind of my experience, and then it's just interesting sharing the panel with both you guys. Then I met Big John, and even this week at the gym, someone came to me and said, "Are you Big John?" Or sorry, they said, "Are you a realtor?" I'm like, "Yes." They're like, "Are you Big John?" So honestly, that happens so often. And I think at the beginning I was kind of like, "No, like I'm Jide, I'm also big." But now I take pride that he's known like that throughout the community, and I've kind of gravitated towards him and what he does in the community and Heritage Hall and all of that. So I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. So thanks for your kind words, and Chad. I've been in Guelph since 1987 as an international student. I came here, and I should say that being an international student is a little bit different. I knew Jide's parents, who I think came as international students from Nigeria. So when I got into real estate, it was a long meandering curve from being a pizza delivery guy working in research and promoting live entertainment and music in the community, and doing radio and doing all these different things. So when I decided, I think my decision to get into real estate happened because my family was involved with real estate in the Caribbean and Tobago, where my dad was a businessman. And it was a natural transition to get into real estate because I always saw myself as a community builder more than a realtor. And I still look at real estate that way. So when I came in 2006 into real estate, I had so many different contacts and so many different, so it's just an opportunity to give back. And by the process of giving back to the community, it gives the ethnic minorities of Guelph an opportunity to see a brother, a black man, doing stuff outside of what the expected responsibilities that you see. Like when you come to Guelph and you go on Stone Road, you see the black international students living in residence, and they come, they do good, then they become doctors, they become lawyers, they become specific, specialized, expectational careers. There's not a lot of them choosing to say, you know what, man, I'm gonna go and try to sell pieces of Canada, which is what real estate is. We essentially are selling stolen land, right? That we have had outstanding treaties to maintain, and we are actually responsible for giving professional advice to people about purchasing real estate and conveyance of real estate, which I think is a huge thing. It's a huge, huge responsibility to be empowered to tell somebody that, you know, I am the person that's gonna make you make your biggest financial decision. That goes beyond the banks, it goes beyond everything. So I thought it was like, wow, I could be part of this and be part of sharing it in a competitive atmosphere because I'm an athlete, so I'm very competitive. So I'm happy to be here. At that time, there was Paul Gould, who was a top producer, and I noticed that the minorities are very small, but they were very good producers. Like in Kitchener, they had Faisal Sashawala, Faisal, there's all of these people of color, and a lot of them are niched to the communities that they serve, and some of them, you know, made it. So I'm always interested in finding ways to have more diversity. And when I say diversity, effective diversity of people that not necessarily had immigrated to Canada on the normal, you know, where there was an economic need to be here, which is not my particular story. I came here because I was an international student. But for folks that come into Canada as regular people and saying, hey, let me take that risk, let me take that leap of faith. You know, how could I help people make that leap of faith to come to a profession that could be very lucrative and could be a community building opportunity and to help them help their communities. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about it and to be part of the group and to see how we could have that growth within the profession. Because yes, Chad, I agree there's a lot more people of color, but I think there's a lot more people that could come in and contribute. There's a lot of people of color in the investment community of Guelph that buying and selling real estate, but some of them are relying on us to find the ideas for them. And we, you know, I think things are looking a lot more rosier. There's certain things that I think we need to change, you know, to make it better.
Just a couple quick anecdotes. Both of them remind me of something. Jide said something, so Jide never told me that story. But when Jide was on our team, I went with him on a listing appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say this was 9 years ago. And, you know, most of my life people think I'm a big guy and Jide towers over me. And we're sitting outside this house waiting for the gentleman to answer the door. And he'd asked Jide to come over. But I was thinking to myself, I never told you the story, but I was thinking to myself, how hilarious is this? Two big black guys standing on a house outside of Bagot Street, getting ready to talk to a Caucasian gentleman about selling his house.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. Yeah. Like, Jide got the listing and then sold the house.
Double-ended it.
Yeah. So but compared to, it was not something I ever thought about. So maybe I didn't go maybe as deep in thought as maybe John does about some of this stuff. But it was something that resonated with me immediately as we walked in the door. I thought, this isn't normal, even for my own life, right? Let alone for Guelph or anything like that.
True.
Right? And then John reminded me of something in my second year at RE/MAX, which would have been about 2002, I guess. I was looking to take my business to the next level, and I'd asked my manager at the time. John mentioned a few people's names from the past that were big producers that were visible minorities, but they weren't black. And I was looking for, I hate to say a role model, but an example of somebody that had done it before me. And there weren't any, at least not in this region. And my manager at the time, the RE/MAX office I worked for, owned several other offices throughout the region. And luckily for me, Mississauga and Oakville were places that had these offices. So he invited me down twice to meet two people. One was a gentleman who was actually doing listing presentation skills to the entire office. There was probably 60 people that showed up for that. And at the time, now I thought he was an older black man, but he was 20 years ago. He's probably in his 50s now. I look back on it. He's probably the same age as I am now. But anyway, and his name was Charles. I don't remember his last name. But he was a top producer in that office in Mississauga. And so that was the first point of reference I had of somebody, as Jide said, that looked kind of like me, who had done something that I'd only seen, quite frankly, Caucasian people do, which was become a very successful top producer in these communities, right? If I go back to Nassau, I could probably do really well as a realtor, but I'd never seen anybody that looked like me do well here. So, not that I was afraid, because I'd already survived my first couple of years, but it was like just a reinforcement that, no, you don't have to be average or just getting by, you can actually take it to the next level. So that gentleman showed me that. The next gentleman, and I think this is more to John's point, and I'm not going to name this person because they were really well-intentioned and they're also a very well-known personality today for real estate investments and stuff. But at the time they were a top producing team leader in Mississauga. And we went out for lunch with my manager, and one of the questions this gentleman asked me, and he was a younger guy, not much older than me at the time, grew up in Oakville, spent his whole life there, never really traveled or anything. And he said, is there a big black community in Guelph? And I laughed. I said, I mean, when I was growing up here, you could literally name the 5 black families in the city, right?
I know Chad. I know this guy since 1988.
I said no. And he said something to my manager at the time, but what he was basically expressing was some concern for me, that he thought it would be a bit of a struggle to try and get to any type of level, because in his mind, a lot of people might not use me because of how I looked. Now, that turned out not to be the case, and if it was the case, I was blissfully ignorant to it, and I certainly had enough people that did choose to use me. But that always stuck with me, that memory, that because honestly, it had never entered my mind until he said it. The gentleman that said that to me, I don't think he was being racist. I think he was trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
But he was ignorant to the fact that not everybody had the same preconceptions.
But that's racism.
Right?
But
That is racism. That is racism, and that is why I'm saying, like, with our diversity and equity training, we have to be mindful that the training that we have actually touches that, because Canada has a lot of institutional racism, and we're very good at iconizing things, like diversity, and like, oh, that's another acronym. So you just put, okay, we're taking care of that. Even in police, we're taking care of it. We need, in this organization, where we actually go dig deeper into the systemic racism that we have. I was just at the conference in Toronto, the leadership conference, and it's the biggest challenge that is facing real estate organizations across Ontario is sexism and racism. And we need to challenge it head on, and we need to take some serious steps on that. And it's not about, oh yeah, we have diversity, good, equity. task force, we need to go at a deeper level and really work hard and earnestly and allow yourself to be vulnerable, to be told that you're racist, so that you could grow and the collective community could grow.
I think you kind of touched on like the microaggressions, and I feel those are not as visible as, you know, outright racism, which I think something we've all had to experience. When I started, you know, how do I get new clients? How do I build my business? My peers who started with me at the same time, I found were kind of going a bit faster than me. So people were like, oh, do cold calling. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna cold call. And I started, I don't know if you remember those flyers I had, I was just going, you know, cold calling. I was finding no success. And someone said to me, well, maybe you shouldn't cold call because they might be afraid of seeing you at the door. And, you know, again, that's a microaggression, somewhat outright racism, but that stuck with me. And, you know, my comfort in doing that was never the same. But again, being here on this panel with you two guys, we've had to rise over all those things. And when it comes to talent, when it comes to skill, when it comes to trust, community building, working hard, there is no color for that. Just some of the obstacles that we've had to overcome have been unfortunate, but have also made us stronger. John touched on, he went to school with my dad. He was an international student. That's how we ended up in Guelph. You know, he wasn't a realtor, but he was my idol in business. So I had that view that no matter what you look like, where you come from, you can do it. So that was instilled in me, and I think that's why I'm still here. So.
Both of you just reminded me of a situation I had. I was covering for a realtor, Monty Albert, actually, who just retired a year or two
I
ago.
love that guy.
Yeah, same.
Learn a lot from Monty.
And Monty had asked me to step in doing a home buyer seminar. I'm going to say this about 2004, 2005. Anyway, long story is I did. I stepped in, and from that seminar, I actually got a client. There was an agent in my office at the time that claimed that it was her client. And my manager settled it by the fact that I actually had a buyer agency and she didn't. But she said something that stuck with me. She said, I don't even know why he's using you, because he's racist. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, he's South African. And I did know he was South African, but anyway, I kind of dismissed it. Over the next several years, I helped this gentleman buy and sell 3 different properties. And then he called me one day and he said, look, things have changed. I'm going to go back to South Africa. He'd fled South Africa because of much of the turmoil and stuff like that. He was a Caucasian, I should have mentioned that. And so we sold the place, and I was sitting at his house the one night, and he was showing me online, I think his property or something. And this is several years later, and probably $50,000 in commissions later, and I don't know how many millions of dollars worth of real estate that this gentleman bought and sold using me. And I said, and I wasn't going to see him again because he was moving back to South Africa. And I said, I have a question for you. And he said, yeah, sure. And to Jide's point, I've worked with this gentleman for years, and not once, not even a microaggression.
Living in a society now that love to say, well, you know, I never see color. And they use that as an opportunity to not change.
That's not what he said.
And that's not what he said.
Yeah.
But I was just using that as a stepping off to the new normal.
Yeah.
I look forward to us doing a lot more as an organization to bring some more diversity and to equip realtors. You talking about that. I've had where I was a listing realtor asked me kindly, he said, John, could I please present your offer on your behalf? because my clients are racist and they wouldn't, and I want you to best represent your client. How do you feel when somebody says that to you? You know, and then you're saying, do you just say, you know what, I'm just here for the money, and say, well, I forget it, I want to do this, you know? So, I mean, that's some of the stuff that I had to deal with. I've had a whole small real estate brokerage say, like, who is that end person doing all this real estate sales? And one of the people in that real estate company, which doesn't exist now, came back to me and said that was being said around in the office, right? But at the same time, I could talk about Bill Swan, who called me when the Guelph Black Heritage building was for sale. A realtor called me, and that, which was Bill Swan, who grew up with First Nations, what I can call descendants of the Underground Railroad, people like the Courtneys and Guelph. And Bill Swan called me to tell me, go get this church. We went and got the church, and that became the Guelph Black Heritage Society, which we founded around realtors actively. I mean, Bill could have said, go find a client to buy it and turn it into a house. He called me, right? So that is realtors developing the community. Now the Guelph Black Heritage Society is an organization that is set up and equipped to handle all the issues around race and around preserving the heritage and history of the Black community in Guelph. So there's realtors out doing that stuff, right? So I just want to big those people up too and say, you know, thank you. And yeah, we could make this happen.
I think what I would take from just 20 minutes of this discussion is things are better than I would have suspected, but there's tons of room for improvement. Right?
Yeah, but you see, in the Canadian psychology, if you only say that, then we will just be, oh, we're just nice. Well, you know, if you want really bad stuff, go to the US. No, I want to work things here.
No, I think you can have, this is just my opinion, I think you could actually say both. Things are better here.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure all of us have spent some time in the US. I've spent quite a bit over the years. Having said that, I think it's okay for people to also acknowledge, you know, it's just like if we're, if I'm trying to become a better basketball, but by the way, just as an anecdote, all through grade school, all through high school, and even in college, all these coaches would try and get me to come out and play basketball.
A good time to
and I'm the only black guy, I swear, in the entire country who's over 5'7" who sucks at basketball. But here's the hilarious thing. And yes, I was a good football player.
Same.
But I was actually a pretty good hockey player, right? Okay. And that would just blow people's minds when I was a kid because they just couldn't, you know, there was like, Tony McKegney, I think, was the only black, so anytime we were playing a pickup game of hockey, you know, everybody takes the name of somebody famous, they'd always call me McKegney because it was the only point of reference they had. Anyway, no, I think there's tons of room for improvement, but it's also fair to acknowledge whether it's Bill Swan or just, you know, we could all probably name so many people that it could have been way worse if it wasn't for these people. Right?
Totally.
And so I want to acknowledge that as well, just at least in my
and I hope the conversation that we have in here is to say to people, the real estate community, I don't, like, what I find that we need to radiate from the community is to how do we tap into that sense of entitlement? What's the role of the Guelph District Association of Realtors around recruitment or the lived experience of what realtors are to get those folks that might not consider real estate? Or is it the role of the individual private sector entities that form, like the RE/MAX or the Royal LePage or the Keller Williams?
My opinion would be more,
I think it's a combined effort, right?
Lean more heavily on the brokerages. Having said that, there is a role for associations. You know, boards traditionally are meant to process listings, I understand that, but that has changed and grown over the years. And then of course we've got our provincial and national. But to that point, I was working with somebody recently, and this is really, I found this interesting in myself. So here's a microaggression from me.
I love that.
Okay. A few years ago I was working with the girl that does marketing for our brokerage. And she was coming up with a bunch of different ideas. And I said to her, I need some faces, you know, some stock faces. And I said, what I need is a silver-haired fox. And so she sent me a silver-haired fox. And I said, no, I need a white guy. And this girl's 25 years younger than me. Okay, so she's in her mid-20s at the time. And she looked at me quizzically. She's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what difference does it make? And I looked at her and I said, that's interesting. I'm the one who should have picked up on that it shouldn't make a difference. But somebody from a different generation picked up on it. And I said, okay. And so we had a discussion. And I said, we're trying to recruit, and I think this is going to touch a little bit on what John's talking about. We're trying to recruit realtors or potential realtors. But I said, I also have to be realistic. And I wasn't in charge of recruiting, I was just trying to help. But I said, only 12% of the people that you're trying to recruit look like me. And only about 35% look different than you, right? This is a Caucasian girl. And I said, so take that back and come up with something. But afterwards I went home and I talked to my wife about it, I talked to my kids, because I thought, Jesus, like, she sent me a picture of a good-looking middle-aged black man, and I was like, I don't know. Because the society that I grew up in and the society I lived in, that's not actually who's probably going to respond to the ad. I'm a marketing major, by the way, right? And I'm thinking, who's going to respond to the ad? And I had a real problem trying to figure out, do I have my own built-in issues, right? Or am I actually just being realistic that there's only so many people that look like me that are even thinking about real estate? And the answer that I came up with, John, is it's both. I think there's some pre-programming based on the society that I grew up in here.
Yeah.
And there's also, I think what you're trying to touch on, another aspect where I thought, but when I thought about real estate, I didn't think about, like, I was really ignorant and maybe naive is probably a better term. I was really naive. It never crossed my mind. And so afterwards, looking back, no, as a brokerage, or brokerages, or whatever you call it, private companies, we should be putting out stuff so that a younger version of me or you or Jide or whoever says, oh shit, I never thought of that. Because I can now see me, as Jide said, I see somebody that looks like me, right? Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I love what you guys are saying, and, you know, I'm not that young, but, you know, of slightly different generation.
Compared to us.
I love his kids, man. I want to borrow two of them.
Yeah.
They're the sweetest two girls, man.
They can stay at your house anytime. Give us a break.
I'll change that,
but yeah, on this notion, I believe that representation matters. And when you started, there was nobody. When John started, there was one. When I started, there was two. And already there's more than that. And, you know, not to give it a plug, but my scholarship, I'm seeing a lot of young African-American students eager, hungry to get out into the market to start their own business. And I went to U of G, there wasn't many of us then. So, you know, what the role we're playing and even being seen and being successful is making a difference to a whole generation that isn't even here yet.
I think there's something to that, to the visual. We're probably getting slightly off real estate, but I think it is part of this. Years ago, when I was trying to figure out how to market myself, for lack of a better term, I would look for looks that I liked, right? How do people dress? How do people, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just throwing names out there, and it probably wasn't these people because it's almost 25 years ago, but, you know, like, it was George Clooney, it was Brad Pitt, it was Tom Ford, it was all, right? I'm like, where's the black version of that I can say, okay, well, I actually, because I don't have the bone structure of Brad Pitt, right? So, you know, and so these are things that, you know,
the pigment.
or whatever. And so how do I fit in that suit, or how do I look or how do you speak, and all this other stuff. You know, John talked about talking to somebody early in his career, and one of the things that somebody said to me on the phone, or not on the phone, but after I got off the phone was, and I don't know if John's ever run into this or not, but they said, well, you don't sound black on the phone, right? So I was adopted at 3 days old. My father was a white English professor. Now I've since reconnected with my natural family and everything, but back then, and so some would say, well, I sound different than John. Even though from a heritage perspective, we're both from the Caribbean, right? Different parts, of course, but still, right? And so getting to the door, this was the point this person was trying to make. Actually, Jide is kind of like this too. Getting to the door on the phone wouldn't be a big deal. It's what happens after you arrive.
I'm going to say that generally speaking, I don't know, I probably saw about 400 and something houses in Guelph. In this general area, I don't know, I haven't counted, I should count. But the majority of my real estate, the ways I enter into the real estate transaction is from the buyer end. You know, in real estate, there's a seller and buyer end. And I don't know if it's racism, because I've always had more buyers than sellers. And buyers I get from referrals from other buyers. So the reason why I'm doing, my numbers are up now is because those buyers that I got into really good houses, they still had to divorce and they still had to leave, unfortunately, and move up. And when they move up, they're now selling. So then I create that. So I don't know if most realtors do enter the market, because we have top realtors here that, you know, became top realtors around the same time that I started, that just marketed, and I know a lot of them are white. They just marketed across the board. I marketed heavy. I was on every TV screen. I was everywhere. Everybody knew my brand. Like, people would know me. My kids grew up with Big John daughter. They don't even know their name. So my brand, I'm like the most visible black person because I'm involved in so much in Guelph. Everywhere you turn, my black ass is there. So it's fun, you know. But you know that. Not everybody have that in them, but so I'm just trying to.
Yeah, and I don't know, because I would say that my career is probably the other side of that. Where it's probably been more listing strong.
Yeah.
And I don't market through, and I certainly don't shy away from it, but I don't have a cool nickname like Big or, you know, and so I don't market my physique or my look. So when people are meeting me, and the internet helps now, but like if you go back 15 years ago when they were meeting me, usually it was, they figured out I was black when I showed up at the front door. And so, I always tracked my, what do you call it, conversion rate, my success rate, if you will. And I never found it was, because all my coaches, all my real estate or business coaches were always white top producers. So I was tracking to the numbers that they were telling me to try and hit, conversion rates, all that kind of stuff. And I always found that I was hitting that or coming close. So on the flip side, I don't know that it mattered, but what I would say is I also probably had a lot more swings at bat than other people because I did market a lot. I didn't necessarily market my face or anything, but you know, Jide was, we used to do a lot of internet marketing. We did a lot of flyers and more postcards, I guess, and stuff like that. And even before that, like, you know, and in that part of my career, I had a partner as well. So maybe I should discount a portion of that and just go back to like the first 10 years or the first 7 years and then the 7 years afterwards. But it's hard to say. All I know is this. It's been a pretty good ride, all things considered. But there's definitely been some moments in that ride that you're like, yeah. But just maybe a little bit of a fun note. I was doing a listing presentation years ago, and I don't want to name names because these people are still active. But at the time, there was probably 3 people of color on the whole board. And I was at this listing presentation, and this gentleman had a Middle Eastern background. And I said, why did you choose me? And I knew that he had sold his place, bought the place with somebody from his background. And there was one other person on the board who was also from that descent. Right? And I said, why'd you choose me? And he said, well, I had a falling out with this other person. And I said, oh, okay, well, why didn't you pick this other person who also was, you know, and again, this is my ignorance, also, and he said, right look, wrong religion. And I said, okay.
Interesting.
And I said, so how'd you end up with me? And he goes, you were the next best thing. So, right, like, you don't know why people do the things they do. But I thought that was interesting. So he chose me because I was brown, but he didn't choose the other person, even though he was brown and more aligned with him, because it was the wrong religion.
Interesting.
And I thought that was interesting. Now, he never once asked me my religion, never mattered to him. He just wasn't going to use this other
Well, I
religion.
call myself Big John in quotes, double quotes, because it's a lot easier for people to accept me. If I call myself Big first, then the conversation about, holy smoke, you're a pretty big guy, doesn't come to distract my expertise.
Right.
Because and Big came back from since back when I went to interviews and people are saying to me, oh, you're a pretty big guy, right? Meaning, you know, how could you fit down the stairway to sell my house if I have a crawl space that Big John can't fit in? So I branded myself Big John to make it easy to get past that initial conversation. If I call myself what I look like, then we could focus on my expertise and my capacity to sell your home. So I just want to make that clear to people.
Nice.
I used to work with a guy, not directly actually, he was in the company, but he was Big Al.
Yeah,
You know, but he was a big dude.
yeah.
And I think, like, I never really, when I saw your marketing and see your marketing, I don't think of it that way. I just think that it's almost like you're playing to your strength. That's how I view it, right? Because you're the kind of person, forget about, this is just my opinion, forget about being black for a second.
Oh.
John, nobody misses you whether you're black or not.
I know, I
right?
know.
Right? And I remember being, I don't know, 22, 23 years old, I'm bouncing, I got a night off, I go to the Cliff and Norms or
Yeah.
something like that, and you know, you're working down there, and I was just like, I never thought like, well, now, I guess it's easy, somebody say, well, that's easy for you to say, but I never thought, well, there's a big black guy. I just thought, that's a big dude, man,
Yeah.
right? So, and and I think to me, when I see marketing like that, that's what I think. I'm like, well, there's a guy.
Well, that's why I
who
did it
knows
that
who
way
he
too,
is.
because I know I could capture the use, but I could also capture the, because I was also fearful. So I even went to RICO, like when I was doing my ethics, and there's a woman who was on the RICO board, and she said, John, as long as you put the quotes with the big, it's almost like separate, you know, your name. Because at one point I was actually going to change my name for RICO standards to Big John Leacock, registered as that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you got to watch, you know, and at some points, I even had some backlash from some people say, John, that is not your registered name in real estate. But I was saying, well, listen, I was gonna say, listen, man, I had to explain my brand to the people, because you know some people have some long names like Decision or what's your full African name?
Baba Jide Atilola.
Yeah.
So there is no, you know, really changing that.
Yeah.
But
I just had an idea. I think now for the next half of my career, I'm just going to call myself Little Chad. Just piggyback right on it.
Guys, I'm losing weight and I'm actually going to be rebranded.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to be the realtor formerly known as Big John
There you
Leacock.
go.
I'm actually going
You're gonna have a symbol?
I'm actually going to brand it and I have a symbol.
You're gonna have a symbol?
That's my plan. I'm going to be the realtor formerly known as Big John Leacock in my health change weight loss thing. So because I think real estate is a multi-trillion-dollar industry and it's going very international now, where we could like network with realtors in Rwanda, where it's a huge country that's developing about real estate in Canada. We could, like, through post-COVID life, right? There's so much virtual real estate that could happen in terms of we are showing us the norms of Canada to the Rwandese or to Ghanaian, to different people, so that people could have a better understanding of how real estate is sold in different cultures.
ownership.
And ownership, and a sense of ownership.
Yeah, that's
Even along the African chiefs and to how to use that power.
that's a very Western thing.
Yeah.
What I was saying was, if nothing else, I hope that this video, because I think the one thing we all agree on is when we got into real estate, there was no point of reference. There was no other black person, or certainly black man or male, and so we are all now a point of reference for anybody who comes in after. Not necessarily a role model, but just a point of reference that no, somebody else, multiple people have done this and succeeded in doing it. You don't last 10 years or 17 years or whatever by not getting by. Like, you have to be successful.
You have to survive, because man, you're only as good as your last deal.
Yeah.
Right, and there's women of color in real estate too that we need to bring into this vibe as well. In Guelph and Chile.
And we tried to reach out to a past, and we did reach out to a current who's fairly new. So the good news is that, you know, and there's somebody else on the committee as well. So we're moving forward. But speaking of moving forward, to get to the next thing, and Jide just said something that isn't in the question, but property rights and ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to leave out property rights for a second. Ownership is something that, in my opinion, black people, but I'll go further into what John is talking about, immigrants in general to Canada. And you can go back 100 years. You can talk about the Italians and the Greeks and the Portuguese, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the one thing that I think people really need to sink their teeth into, because the only reason that at this stage in my life I have any degree of comfort is through real estate ownership, not sales.
Yeah,
okay?
It's true ownership.
And when you have ownership or private property rights, however you want to convey that, then you're building wealth, right? Mm-hmm. And this is just my opinion, but that's something I want to see, and this is a selfish opinion, but I want to see more black people and people of color do, because when I was growing up, I have to be careful what I say here. When I was growing up, the people of color that I knew rented. And so fast forward, you know, so let's say my teens, fast forward 25 years, they're now in their 70s, and they're really struggling, just like a lot of people are, because they never owned anything. And the people that I know who are maybe similar of age, who grew up and worked in the same factories or the same stores or whatever, who have more comfort, it's because they owned, if nothing else, they owned their own personal residence. And some of them actually owned, you know, an investment property or a cottage or whatever. And I don't see enough people of color taking that seriously. I don't see enough people in general taking it seriously, but particularly in the communities that I know. And
I think that's beautiful, the points you've made, that ownership, it really starts to balance the scale. Because when you own, that's someone else not owning that.
Right.
And that gives the power back to everyone and spreads it more equally, and it's also generational, right? So it's something you can pass down to your kids, or the savings could go towards their education, a company they're going to start.
It's leverage.
It's leverage, it's power, it's you know, taking it into your own hands. My advice I'd give to, you know, new realtors of color would be to be yourself. You know, learn, you know, get as much knowledge and experience as you can, but ultimately, you're you. You're not someone else that doesn't look like you. And I think when you harness who you are, people feel that and they gravitate towards that, and it brings a uniqueness to the marketplace, to real estate, and to everyone you serve and your community. Authenticity. And the one point John had mentioned about community building, you know, I've learned a lot of that through you. It's important that as you start to have success or be doing it for 23 years or 10 years or 17 years, that you give back to the community that has given you this. And, you know, that's something that I do. I know we all do that, and I think that's an important piece to what